From the outside, the Turner family was the kind of picture-perfect success story neighbors whispered about, with equal parts admiration and envy. In the small Midwestern town of Maplewood, Illinois, where everybody knew each other's business and reputations were currency, the Turners seemed untouchable. Edward Turner, a self-made real estate developer, was the man you wanted shaking your hand at the Chamber of Commerce. His wife, Margaret, was the polished face of every charity gala and church fundraiser. Their children, Ryan and Claire, looked like the model siblings you'd see smiling on a Christmas card taped to the fridge. But behind the heavy oak doors of their colonial-style home, the truth was far less idyllic. The Turners were masters at keeping appearances spotless, even if it meant burying uncomfortable truths under layers of charm and social polish. Ryan, the eldest, was groomed for greatness, the golden boy who could do no wrong. Claire, 3 years younger, was the quiet achiever, praised for her accomplishments only when they didn't outshine her brother Dot in Maplewood. Image wasn't just important, it was survival. And in this family, the unspoken rule was simple: you protect the Turner name, no matter the cost. That rule had been bent before, sometimes broken, but on one fateful night, it would be shattered, along with 3 of Claire's ribs, setting in motion a chain of events that would expose not just the fracture in her bones, but the deep, jagged cracks in the family itself from the time they were children. The differences between Ryan and Claire were as plain as the family portraits that lined the hallway. Ryan's strong personality, as Margaret liked to call it, often came with slammed doors, broken toys, and an air of entitlement that followed him like a shadow. If he destroyed one of Claire's birthday presents in a fit of rage, the solution was simple: replace it, smooth things over, and remind her to understand your brother. He just feels things deeply. It didn't stop at toys. As they grew, the outbursts changed shape: harsh words about her looks, snide comments about her friends, a smirk when she brought home perfect grades, followed by a family dinner in his honor if he managed a barely passing score. The pattern was so ingrained that it became invisible, like wallpaper you've lived with so long. You stop noticing the cracks. Claire learned early that her worth was measured in how well she stayed in her lane. When she showed real talent for watercolor painting in high school, her art teacher urged her to apply to specialized programs. Her father shut the idea down instantly. Painting's a hobby, Claire. Something for Sunday afternoons, not a way to pay the mortgage. The unspoken message was clear in this family. Personal dreams were disposable if they didn't align with the Turner image. Ryan, on the other hand, could afford mistakes. If a college application fell short, Edward found a way to grease the wheels with a generous donation to the business school. If Ryan's internship ended abruptly because of personality conflicts, the family spun it into a story about how he was too ambitious for small-minded people. Every misstep was recast as proof of his leadership potential. And Claire? She was the dutiful daughter who smiled through it all. She put away her brushes and picked up a stethoscope, telling herself that medicine was a noble calling, and maybe, just maybe, earning an MD would earn her a place of equal pride beside her brother. By the time she graduated from medical school, she had mastered the art of self-editing, the quiet nod when Ryan interrupted her, the polite laugh when a family friend praised her for taking after her father instead of her own achievements. Even when she left for her residency in Chicago, putting 100 miles between herself and Maplewood, the distance felt temporary. Deep down, she still carried the hope that one day her parents would see her for who she was, not just for how well she stayed in Ryan's shadow. The irony was that Ryan's temper, the same flaw she'd been told to excuse all her life, hadn't improved with age. In private, he was still capable of the same sharp words and cutting gestures, but now they came with the physical presence of a grown man who knew no one in the family would hold him accountable when he drank, and he drank often. The edge in his voice sharpened, his patience thinned, and the room seemed to bend toward his moods. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a family system designed to protect the heir at all costs. Edward saw Ryan as the future of the Turner legacy. Margaret saw him as the son who would keep the family name glittering in Maplewood's tight social circle. And both parents had learned over the years that Claire would fall in line, even if it meant swallowing her own hurt. Still, Claire believed, or maybe wanted to believe, that adulthood would even the playing field. She had a career now, one that saved lives. She had seen the world beyond Maplewood's manicured lawns. Surely, the gap between Golden Boy and Scapegoat couldn't last forever. Surely they could meet as equals. But some dynamics are carved deep, and no amount of degrees or distance can erase them. In the Turner family, loyalty meant silence, and silence meant survival. Claire knew the rule. She had followed it for 26 years. What she didn't know, not yet, was that the next time Ryan's temper flared, that rule would be tested in a way no one in the Turner family could have imagined. It was a crisp Saturday evening in late October when Claire pulled into her parents' driveway, the maple trees along Oak Hill Lane glowing in shades of gold and crimson. The Turner house, 3 stories of colonial grandeur, windows lit warmly against the early dusk, looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Tonight was Ryan's night, a family dinner to celebrate his promotion to vice president. At Turner Development. Claire had spent the afternoon at a local wine shop, carefully choosing a bottle of small batch bourbon she knew he loved. At $89.95, it wasn't cheap, especially with her student loan payments looming. But she told herself it was worth it. Maybe, just maybe, the gesture would thaw the ice that so often formed between them. When she stepped through the front door, the familiar scent of her mother's beef Wellington drifted from the kitchen. The dining room table gleamed under the chandelier, set with her grandmother's china and polished silver. A congratulations, Ryan banner hung over the fireplace, and Margaret bustled about, smoothing the tablecloth and adjusting candles. "You're early," Margaret said without looking up. "Good. You can toss the salad." In the kitchen, Ryan was already holding court with their father, swirling a glass of bourbon and talking about the company's new Riverside project. He looked relaxed, confident, the kind of ease that came when you knew the room was yours. Claire offered the bottle she'd brought, and he accepted it with a nod that felt more like acknowledgement than gratitude. By the time they sat down to dinner, the atmosphere was warm, almost cheerful. Edward raised his glass for a toast, praising Ryan's leadership and vision. "One day, you'll take Turner Development further than I ever dreamed," he said. Glasses clinked, smiles exchanged. Claire joined in, telling Ryan the Riverside clients seemed thrilled with his work. For a moment, it felt like family. But by the 3rd round of bourbon, Ryan's tone shifted. He started talking about Megan, his girlfriend of 6 months, and how they were planning to move in together. Claire smiled genuinely. She liked Megan. They'd run into each other at the grocery store the week before, chatted about weekend plans, and Megan had mentioned her family's lake house. "I'm looking forward to seeing it this summer," Claire said, recalling the easy conversation. Ryan's smile vanished. "When did you talk to Megan?" Claire hesitated, surprised at the sharpness in his voice. "Last week. Just a quick chat." "What else did she say?" His tone had an edge now, the air around the table shifting. "She mentioned your dad's fishing boat needed repairs. She should keep her mouth shut about my family," Ryan snapped, cutting her off. The room went still. Margaret glanced at her plate. Edward cleared his throat. "She didn't say anything bad," Claire offered, trying to calm the moment. But Ryan was already on a roll, dredging up a comment Megan had made weeks earlier about the Turners being intense. He mocked her family's flaws in return, his voice rising. The warmth from earlier had curdled into something tense and brittle. "Always so perfect, aren't you, Claire? The doctor, the good daughter, everyone's favorite." He sneered. Claire almost laughed at the irony, but she knew better. "I think you're misunderstanding. Don't tell me what I understand," Ryan barked, slamming his glass down hard enough to slosh bourbon onto the white tablecloth. The sound made Margaret flinch. Edward stepped in. "Son, let's dial it back. This is supposed to be a celebration." Ryan pushed back his chair with a screech, muttered something about needing air, and stalked toward the kitchen. Claire followed a few minutes later, hoping to smooth things over before dessert. She found him pouring another drink, his shoulders tense. "I didn't mean to upset you," she said softly. "I like Megan. Stay out of my relationship." He cut in, stepping closer. "You've always been jealous," Dad's company, Mom's attention, everything. The accusation was so backwards she almost laughed, and that's when it happened. Ryan's face twisted, and before she could react, he shoved her hard. The granite counter caught her ribs with a force that stole her breath. Pain shot through her chest, sharp and deep, like fire spreading with every inhale. She crumpled to the floor, gasping. Margaret's scream brought Edward running. Ryan was already spinning his version. She tripped. Claire couldn't answer through the pain, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't just another outburst to be smoothed over. Something had broken, and not just in her ribs. The pain was instant and all-consuming, a hot, stabbing ache that radiated through Claire's chest and made every breath feel like dragging glass into her lungs. She clutched her side, trying to push herself upright, but the room tilted and her knees gave out. Margaret was suddenly beside her, the scent of Chanel No. 5 heavy in the air. "Claire, can you get up, honey?" she asked in a voice that wavered. Between worry and calculation, Edward's shadow loomed in the doorway, his jaw tight. "What happened?" "She fell," Ryan said quickly, his voice flat, like he'd already rehearsed the line. "I didn't," Claire tried to speak, but the effort sent a jolt of pain through her ribs so sharp it stole her words. Margaret's hand lingered on her arm, but her eyes flickered toward Ryan in a silent exchange. Claire recognized that look, the one that meant the story was already being decided. The narrative locked before she could even protest. "Let's not overreact," Edward said. Stepping into the kitchen, "Take some ibuprofen, rest, we'll reassess in the morning." Rest. Claire's medical training screamed otherwise. She knew the sound she'd heard when she hit the counter wasn't just bone bruising. That was the sickening crack of a fracture, maybe more than one. And with every shallow breath, the possibility of a punctured lung lurked at the edges of her mind. "I need to go to the hospital," she managed between clenched teeth. "I'll drive you," Margaret offered quickly, but something in her tone felt more like containment than care. "I can drive myself," Claire said. The last thing she wanted was to be trapped in a car with her mother, fielding a lecture about family loyalty while she could barely breathe. Edward moved closer, lowering his voice. "Claire, these family disagreements happen. Don't make more of this than it is." Family disagreements. That was his label for this. She pushed herself upright, wincing, every movement like a blade under her ribs. She grabbed her purse and keys from the counter, ignoring Margaret's murmured protests. Behind her, she could hear Edward's low, urgent voice talking to Ryan. The words indistinct, but the tone unmistakable, protective, strategic. Already planning how to make this go away. The drive home was agony. Every bump in the road sent waves of pain through her chest, her grip on the steering wheel so tight her knuckles whitened. The logical part of her brain knew she should head straight to the ER, but another part, the one conditioned over decades to minimize, to endure, convinced her to wait until morning. That night, she couldn't lie down without the pain stealing her breath. She ended up in her recliner, propped with pillows, drifting in and out of shallow, uneasy sleep. Each time she woke, the scene replayed in her head, Ryan's face twisted in anger, the force of his shove, her mother's quick shift into image management. By morning, the bruise blooming across her side was a violent purple, edged in black. The pain was worse, not better. She could barely raise her arm when the phone rang at 7:15 a.m. Margaret's name flashed on the screen. "How are you feeling this morning?" her mother asked, as if inquiring about a mild headache. "Not good. I can barely move," Claire replied. "These things always feel worse the next day," Margaret said, her tone light. "Take some Advil, ice it, and listen. About last night, my ribs are broken." Claire cut in. "Ryan seriously hurt me." There was a pause, and when Margaret spoke again, the warmth had drained from her voice, replaced by something deliberate, coaxing. "Sweetheart, it was an unfortunate incident, but let's not blow it out of proportion. Ryan feels terrible. Has he said that? Has he called to apologize? He will. But right now, we need to focus on moving past this. Your father and I think it's best if we just put it behind us." The subtext was clear. Don't talk. Don't tell. Don't make this real. Claire closed her eyes, a wave of exhaustion hitting her harder than the pain. She had followed that rule her entire life. But something about the ache in her ribs, the memory of the granite counter, and the way her parents had looked right past her pain, made her realize the rule might be about to break. By mid-morning, the bruise along Claire's rib cage had deepened into a grotesque palette of purple, green, and angry black. Every shallow breath felt like a knife pressing from the inside. She didn't need an X-ray to know at least one rib was fractured. Her medical training told her exactly what she was dealing with. What she couldn't wrap her head around was how her parents could look at her last night and still call it nothing. The phone rang again. Margaret. Against her better judgment, Claire answered. "Sweetheart, I've been thinking," her mother began, her voice syrupy in a way Claire recognized as calculated. "If Kyle really hurt you that badly, you would have gone to the hospital last night." "Mom, I'm a doctor. I know what broken ribs feel like." "Well, I just don't want you to overreact. Questions will be asked, forms will be filled out, things get put on record," Margaret said, her voice dipping. "It's best to keep this within the family. Think about Kyle's future." There it was, the real priority. Not her pain, not her health. His future. A few minutes later, Edward called. "Your mother tells me you're thinking about seeing a doctor. That's premature. There's not much they can do for ribs anyway. Just rest and take medication. I also know a displaced rib can puncture a lung," Claire replied evenly. Edward paused. "If you go in, what are you planning to tell them? The truth?" "Yes, think very carefully about what you're doing," he said, his voice hardening. "Kyle's worked incredibly hard. A misunderstanding like this could ruin him." Misunderstanding. The word hit her like another blow. She ended the call before she could hear more of the justifications. By noon, a delivery driver appeared at her door with a glossy gift basket, pain relievers, a heating pad, luxury bath salts, and a box of her favorite dark chocolates. The card read, "Rest and recover. Family always comes first. Love, Mom and Dad." Claire set it on the counter and walked away. It felt less like care and more like a bribe. The rest of the day was a carousel of calls and texts. Margaret checked in hourly, each conversation circling back to the same refrain: "Don't make this public." Edward called twice more, his tone shifting from concern to openly forceful. Extended family chimed in, an aunt warning she was tearing the family apart, a cousin texting that she was being dramatic. Then, finally, Ryan's name lit up her phone. Against her better judgment, she picked up. "Mom said I should call you," he began, voice flat. "I guess things got out of hand last night. I had a lot to drink. You broke my ribs, Ryan." "Come on, I barely pushed you. You probably just bruised them when you fell." "I didn't fall. You shoved me into the counter." "Whatever. I'm trying to smooth things over. Mom and Dad are freaking out you'll make this a big deal." "It is a big deal," she shot back. "We all have bad days. Remember when you crashed my car in high school? I didn't make that a federal case." The comparison was so absurd, she could only stare at the wall in disbelief. "Don't be stupid." "Claire," he added, his voice sharpening, "you're going to regret it if you blow this up." It took every ounce of restraint not to hang up. The moment the threat slipped from his mouth, when she finally ended the call, her hands were shaking, from pain, from fury, from the sheer weight of what she was up against. She thought of her patients, people she'd advised to seek help, to protect themselves, to speak up. And here she was hesitating. That was the moment she decided. She wasn't going to let their silence become hers. She picked up the phone, called her friend Melissa, and said the words that felt like a first step toward something bigger than just getting medical care. "I need a ride to the doctor, today." Asterisk. By the time Melissa pulled up in front of Claire's apartment, the pain had sharpened to the point where even the strongest prescription-strength ibuprofen from her own medical kit barely took the edge off. Every bump in the road on the way to the clinic was a small agony. Claire sat stiffly in the passenger seat, cradling her side and focusing on shallow breaths, the way she'd advised patients countless times, except now she was the one fighting. Not to pass out, they chose a medical office on the edge of town, far enough from Maplewood's gossip mill to avoid running into one of her parents' friends. Melissa practically insisted on walking her inside, steadying her arm as they crossed the parking lot At the reception desk, Claire left the cause of injury section of the intake form blank. Even now, the old reflex to protect her family's image still tried to guide her pen. Minutes later, the exam room door opened and in walked Dr. Laura Benson, mid-50s, calm confidence in her stride, eyes that had clearly seen their share of human messiness and refused to flinch. She extended a hand. Dr. Turner, or should I call you Claire? I've heard good things from Dr. Whitmore over at the clinic, though I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. Claire's fine, she said, trying for a smile but producing more of a grimace. Dr. Benson glanced at the chart. Chest, pain, difficulty breathing. Can you tell me what happened? Claire hesitated, every muscle in her body tensing. I was pushed, hit the corner of a counter. Who pushed you? Benson's voice was calm, steady. My brother, Claire admitted, her gaze dropping to the floor. The doctor didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, she began the exam, listening to Claire's breathing, palpating along her ribcage with practiced gentleness. Even so, the touch made Claire wince hard. Significant bruising, Benson murmured, her brow furrowing. I'm ordering x-rays right away. The results came back quickly. 3 fractured ribs, one with a dangerous displacement that explained the stabbing shortness of breath. Benson sat across from her, expression grave. You're lucky the displacement didn't puncture a lung. That's not the kind of thing you wait and see at home. Claire nodded, ashamed of how long she'd hesitated. There's something else, Benson continued. What you've described as domestic violence, and as a physician, I'm a mandatory reporter. That means I'm legally required to file a report with the police. Claire's stomach twisted. You can't. My family. They'll be angry. They'll cut you off. They'll make you feel like the villain. Benson's voice was soft, but her eyes didn't waver. I understand more than you might think. When I was in my 20s, my father broke my arm during an argument. My mother begged me to tell her I fell down the stairs, and I did. 2 years later, he put her in the hospital with a concussion and a broken jaw. I've spent 30 years wondering if I could have stopped it by speaking up the first time. The words landed heavy, almost like a physical weight on Claire's chest. She thought of Megan, of the temper she'd seen in Ryan all her life, of the way her parents excused him over and over. What would he be like in 10 years? With a wife, with kids? Benson leaned forward. If one of your patients came in with these injuries, and this story, what would you advise? The answer was immediate, clinical, and clear. I'd tell them to report it. Then why not yourself? The old conditioning screamed in her head. Family loyalty, reputation, keeping the peace, but beneath it was something quieter, stronger, because I matter, too. She took a slow breath, wincing at the pain. Okay, do what you need to do. Benson reached over and squeezed her hand gently. It's not the easy choice, but it's the right one. In that small, sterile exam room, Claire felt something she hadn't in years, the first flicker of control over her own life. The call from the Maplewood Police Department reached her parents' house before Claire even made it home from the clinic. By the time she stepped through her apartment door, her phone was already vibrating nonstop. 10 missed calls from Margaret, 4 from Edward, and 1 from an unknown local number that she guessed was Ryan. She didn't answer any of them. Not yet. The first message from her mother came in the form of a text. What have you done? Call me now. The second was a voicemail, Margaret's voice tight and controlled, like someone trying to keep from screaming in public. Claire, this is beyond unacceptable. The police just called your father. Do you understand what you've started? This will be in the papers. People will talk. You've humiliated this family. Call me immediately. Edward's message was shorter and sharper. You crossed a line. Fix it. Now. Claire sank onto her couch, every movement sending a fresh stab of pain through her ribs. She knew this moment would come. Benson had warned her, but knowing didn't make it easier. For 30 years, she'd been trained to see her family's anger as a crisis she was responsible for fixing. When the knock came at her door 20 minutes later, she wasn't surprised to see her father's tall frame silhouetted in the frosted glass. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Do you have any idea what this will do to your brother's career? Do you have any idea what he did to my ribs? She shot back. Edward's jaw tightened. It was an accident. The officer said they'll probably just want to ask a few questions. If you retract your statement, this can all go away. I'm not retracting anything. His voice dropped into that low, dangerous register she remembered from childhood arguments. Claire, the Turners don't air dirty laundry. We handle things privately. That's how we've kept our name respected in this town for generations. She met his eyes, her own voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Maybe that's the problem. He stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to recognize the daughter who used to fold at the first sign of disappointment. Then, without another word, he left, the door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a break in more than just conversation. The next call was from Ryan himself. She debated ignoring it but answered anyway, curiosity overriding caution. "You've lost your mind," he said without preamble. "The cops showed up at my office today. My boss looked at me like I was a criminal. Do you have any idea? I have 3 broken ribs," she interrupted. "That's not an idea. That's a fact. You're pathetic." He spat. "I told you last night I was sorry. You never said sorry." She cut in again. "You minimized it, blamed me, and now you're panicking because there are consequences." There was a beat of silence before his voice hardened. "You think you're going to win here? You're not. Mom and Dad are on my side. Always have been. Always will be. I know," she said quietly. "That's why this is going to the law instead of them." The line went dead. That night, her apartment felt smaller than usual. Every creak in the building amplified in the silence. She sat in her recliner, wrapped in a blanket, her heating pad pressed gently to her side. She expected to feel guilt, the kind that had been conditioned into her for decades. But instead there was something different, not relief exactly, but a strange, tentative calm. For the first time, the outcome wasn't in her family's hands. And that, she realized, was the first step toward reclaiming her own. 2 days after filing the report, Claire was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea. When the knock came, it wasn't the sharp, impatient rap of a family member. It was steady, measured. She opened the door to find Detective Angela Price standing there, badge clipped to her belt, notepad in hand. "Dr. Turner, I'm following up on your report," Price said with a polite but no-nonsense tone. Claire invited her in, bracing herself for the questions she knew were coming. The detective listened carefully as Claire described the night in detail. The dinner, the argument, the shove, the pain that had followed. Price didn't interrupt, except to clarify timelines and distances. She asked where everyone had been sitting, how far Claire had been from the counter, and whether alcohol was involved. When Claire hesitated at the mention of alcohol, Price gave her a look that was firm but kind. "This isn't about protecting anyone's reputation. This is about facts." The words landed heavily. Facts, something her family had always twisted when it suited them. Price explained that, as part of the investigation, she'd be speaking with Ryan, their parents, and anyone else who might have seen or heard what happened. "I can't promise how they'll react, but I can promise their version won't erase yours," she said before leaving. That assurance echoed in Claire's mind for the rest of the day. Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed with a call from an unexpected number. "Megan, I heard the police came to Ryan's office," Megan said, her voice low. "Are you okay?" Claire was taken aback. "I didn't think you'd want to be involved." There was a pause before Megan spoke again. "I do. I've seen his temper. I've been on the receiving end of it. Not like what he did to you, but close enough. I didn't know how bad it could get." The admission hit Claire like a cold wind. "Megan, you don't have to." "I want to," Megan interrupted. "If they need a statement, I'll give one. I'm not protecting him anymore." It was the first real glimmer of solidarity Claire had felt since this began. Not just someone believing her, but someone willing to speak up. Over the next few days, more small but surprising shifts happened. A nurse from the hospital where Claire sometimes picked up shifts texted to say she'd overheard Ryan's outburst at a charity event months ago. A neighbor from her parents' street mentioned that she'd once seen Ryan grab Claire's arm hard enough to leave a mark when they were in high school. These moments didn't erase the hostility. Coming from her parents, Margaret had sent to more voicemails dripping with disappointment, and Edward had left one curt message warning her that this is your last chance to stop embarrassing us, but they planted something sturdier inside her. The knowledge that the family's version of reality wasn't the only one that existed. When Detective Price called back to say she'd like Megan's contact information and would also be requesting the hospital's medical records, Claire felt a sense of forward motion. For once, the situation wasn't just stalling in a fog of denial and manipulation. It was moving, slowly, yes, but towards something like accountability. That night, she sat in her recliner, ribs still aching, tea cooling in her hands, and thought about the years she'd swallowed every injustice for the sake of keeping the Turner name spotless. It occurred to her that maybe that spotless reputation had been built, in part, on her silence, and breaking it might be the only honest thing she'd ever done for herself. Claire hadn't set foot in her parents' house since the night of the dinner, but when Margaret called and said, "We need to talk, all of us, face to face," there was a tone that made it clear this wasn't a request. Melissa offered to come with her, but Claire declined. Some battles, she thought, you have to walk into alone. The Turners' home looked the same as it always had: manicured lawn, brass porch light, the faint smell of cedar from the front steps, but walking up the path felt different. Every step was a reminder that she was no longer the daughter who came here to keep the peace. Inside, the living room was staged like a boardroom meeting. Edward sat in his leather armchair, Margaret perched on the edge of the sofa, and Ryan leaned against the fireplace, arms crossed. No one offered her a seat. "Claire," Edward began, voice calm in a way that made her stomach knot, "we've had some time to think about all of this. We believe it's best for the family, and for you, if you withdraw the complaint." "I'm not withdrawing it," she said evenly. Ryan gave a short, incredulous laugh. "You're really going to drag your own brother through the mud over a little accident?" "You broke 3 of my ribs, Ryan," she said, her voice sharp but steady. "That's not an accident. That's violence." Margaret's lips tightened. "Sweetheart, families fight. Sometimes people get hurt, but you don't take it to the police. You handle it privately." "That's exactly what you've been saying my whole life," Claire replied. "And that's exactly why he's never been held accountable for anything he's done." Ryan's smirk faltered for a moment, but Edward leaned forward, filling the silence. "If you continue down this path, there will be consequences, not just for Ryan, but for you. You'll be cut off from the family business, the trust fund, everything." It was meant to scare her. It would have once, but the threat felt strangely hollow now. "Then I guess I'll find another way to live," she said, "because I'm done paying for my place here with my silence." For a moment, the room went still. Margaret's eyes darted between them, as if searching for a way to rewind the conversation. Finally, she softened her voice. "Claire, you're not thinking clearly. You're emotional. If you just let this go, we can go back to the way things were." Claire stood, the ache in her ribs flaring, but her voice unshaken. "That's the point, Mom. I don't want to go back to the way things were." She turned toward the door, but paused with her hand on the knob. "I'm not doing this to hurt the family. I'm doing it so the next time Ryan loses his temper, maybe no one else gets hurt. You may not believe me now, but one day you might thank me for it." Ryan scoffed. "Don't hold your breath." She didn't look back. The door shut behind her with a quiet click, but in her chest, something heavy finally gave way. Walking to her car, she realized that, for the first time in decades, she wasn't carrying the burden of their approval. It was still going to hurt. The investigation, the distance, the inevitable gossip in town, but it was her choice, and that made all the difference. 3 months later, the case against Ryan reached its conclusion. He accepted a plea deal, mandatory anger management, community service, and a restraining order keeping him from contacting Claire. The Turners' social circle buzzed with speculation, but Claire didn't flinch under the sideways glances at the grocery store or the whispers at the farmer's market. She'd moved into a small craftsman home on the edge of town where sunlight streamed through the kitchen each morning, and the only voices she heard were the ones she welcomed. Melissa came by often. Megan stopped in once with coffee and an apology. And even Detective Price had called to check in. The bruises had long since faded. But Claire knew healing wasn't just about bones knitting back together. It was about rewriting the rules she'd been forced to live by. And the most important rule she'd written for herself was this: silence never protects the right people. Sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is speak out when everyone you love is begging you to stay quiet. But your life, your safety, and your truth are worth more than any family name or reputation. Real love doesn't demand your silence. It protects your voice. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against pressure to stay silent? I'd love to hear your experience. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these powerful conversations going.